Good evening. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. I know you may be a little bit house burnt like some of the rest of us. Fortunately for me, I've been able to go into the office, but my contact with people has been very limited. And you know that there's no baseball or golf or anything like that on TV, and for a baseball fan, that's a struggle. And I'm sure that most of you know by now I'm a baseball fan, and I'm going to tell you it was a real struggle today not to give you another devotional based on baseball, because if you know any history, you know that it was on April the 8th in 1974 that Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's home run record. But I'm going to go a little bit different direction today. It's going to be related to something with this day in history, but also to do with some things that are going on in our current time. Now, I know that most of you know and you've seen that the coronavirus is wreaking havoc on our economy. It's making very difficult times for a lot of businesses. Even though restaurants remain open, they can't have people on the inside. A lot of businesses have been forced to close, so it's created very difficult times. I wonder, as I think about this, if some of those small businesses will be able to get back going, if they'll be able to start back up when all this is over with. I wonder about some of my favorite buffet places of the past, the Shoney's Breakfast Buffet. How long is it going to be before people feel safe eating at a buffet restaurant again? What's going to happen to those places? What's going to happen to the people that have been laid off, that have lost their jobs? I know there's some stimulus checks coming and things like that, but is that going to be enough to get people over the hump? That's things that we wonder about and they worry about. And I wonder how many individuals are going to be left in financial ruin and in bankruptcy. And even though I am concerned about these things, I worry about my own situation, my finances, the things to come. I have concern about those things, but I also know that those are not the only things that are important in life. And I know that those are not the things that can make a person whole. I want to read some names to you, and let's see if you can figure out what these people have in common. Here are the names: Robert Johnson, Brian Jones, Alan Wilson, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Ron McCarran, Kurt Cobain, and Amy Winehouse. Now, you may not know the connection, but you probably know that they are all famous musicians, and likely you probably know that they are all passed from this life, that they are all dead. Perhaps what you did not know, that they are members of an exclusive club that's called the 27 Club. All these folks died at 27 years of age, the most recent being Amy Winehouse. Three of those people died in 1970. It was Alan Wilson, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin. All died in 1970 at the age of 27 years old. And if you go and you do a little bit of research on all these people, you'll find out that all of those people died in connection to do with something about the way that they were living their lives: drugs, alcoholism, things of that nature. The decadence of their lives was connected. Their mental instability. Even though these people had found fame and riches and all those things, it was still not enough to fill that hole that was inside of them. They were continuing to look for something else. The reason that I'm using this is because I was looking at some interesting points from history, and it just so happens that it was on this day, April the 8th, 1994, that Kurt Cobain was found dead in a greenhouse on his property in Seattle, Washington. The singer had fresh track marks on his arms and a shotgun between his legs. The authorities believe that he had committed suicide about 3 days earlier, somewhere around April the 5th, that he had left a note behind talking about some of the things to do with his reasons. So even though he had found great fame, Cobain was the leader of the rock band Nirvana, or the grunge band Nirvana, that was based out of Seattle. They were extremely famous. They've been attributed with turning a regional music scene in the Pacific Northwest into a worldwide cultural or pop cultural phenomenon. Some have said that their single "Smells Like Teen Spirit" defined an entire era. And one writer said that they gave birth to a rock and roll revolution. Their 1991 album, Nevermind, at its height was selling 300,000 copies per week. And before it was done, it had sold 30 million copies. Can you imagine how much money that was bringing in 300,000 copies a week, 30 million. It went diamond according to those things, not gold, not platinum, but diamond. So it was a huge seller, huge finances coming in. They were at the top, at the pinnacle of fame, had money, anything that you could buy, but all those things, they were not enough for Kurt Cobain. They left him with a hole inside of himself where he turned to drugs to try to fill that hole, and then finally committing suicide. So you see, all those things, they're not enough. Some things that the Bible has to say about that, you're probably all familiar with a verse in regards to money being the root of evil, or the root of all kinds of evil. But let me give you what that verse actually says. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, Paul writes, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." And then this is the part that probably most people couldn't quote, but he says, "For which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So you see, people go chasing after riches. It's not going to fill that hole that's missing inside of them. It's not going to fill up that thing that is lacking in their life. And in fact, Paul says that they pierced themselves through with many sorrows. We know the words of Christ in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So you see, we need to be laying up things where we can't lose them, where they can't be done away with. We know that the coronavirus, the financial situation that's going along with this, it's going to cause some trouble for people. But that's not what's going to fill a hole that's missing inside of us. And there's no wonder that people feel like this, because we've got some clues about this. I believe it's because of something to do with the way that God has made us. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11, the writer Solomon says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity in their hearts, except no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." So Solomon says he's put eternity in our hearts. And when Paul was preaching his famous sermon on Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17, beginning in verse 26, this is what Paul had to say. He said that he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwelling, so that they should seek the Lord and hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. You see, it seems to me like when I put together the words of Solomon from the book of Ecclesiastes and the sermon of Paul in Acts chapter 17, that we have got something that is built into us that causes us to want to seek after God. All the riches, selling 30 million albums, having 300,000 albums selling a week, all the money, the fame, whatever else that goes along with that, that can't fill the hole that's in your heart that God has put there, that's caused you to seek after the things to do with eternity, the spiritual things. Only God is going to be able to fill those things. Now, I'm not telling you that people are not going to have hard times. I'm not telling you that people are not going to have difficulties. I'm not telling you that there's not going to be anguish and worry and torment, and that there's going to be stress, and that there's going to be tears over financial times. But what I'm telling you is that if you put all your stock in those things, it's going to make it worse. And in the end, no matter how many of those things that you have, no matter how much money you have, no matter how big your house is, no matter how many cars you have, if you don't have God in your life, there's going to always seem like there's something missing from your life. So those things are not going to be able to fill that hole. Friends, I pray that as these times come along, whether it is that you're struggling, whatever it is that's going on in your life, that you remember the things that are important. Remember the blessings that you have. Remember, if you feel like something's missing from your life, it's probably God. You probably need to be closer to God. When you're dealing with others that are facing similar problems, introduce them to God. Introduce them to Jesus Christ. And I'm sure that we'll be all better off for it. Thank you for tuning in, and I pray that you have a blessed evening.